just want to give you a basic introduction to using acrylic paints to create paintings and some of the basic materials that you'll need to use to get started. Acrylics are a little bit different than oil-based paints because they're a little bit more fixed. Once you get them on the canvas, they tend to dry pretty quickly, whereas oil paints, you can go back and you can modify them pretty easily for a while. They're really easy to blend. They make light and nice, soft transitions between the different colors. But acrylics are a little bit more difficult to work with. So, there's a lot of different materials to work with. First off, we have the brushes. There's lots of different kinds of brushes. You have larger ones to work with larger canvases and areas. There's smaller ones for detail work. They have little points. Some have an edge so that they're easy to get into corners. And there's even ones with rounded tips to make it a little bit easier to do kind of fanning and flaring. Next up, we have the paints. These paints are from just a sampler pack. You can get this kind of thing at pretty much any hobby store or art store. It just makes it easier to get a bunch of smaller colors so you can get sampled. And then there's water. You want to make sure that you have that on hand so that you can wash out your brushes. Once you wash out your brush, then you blot it on the cleaning cloth here. Just use a paper towel so that you can make sure and get all the paint off of the end of the brush. And next up is the little bowl. I like these bowls because there's a little bit of room in there to be able to mix the paints. You can have multiple colors. You can have them, separated out a little bit. And finally, the canvases. You can get canvases in different sizes. These are actually pretty small. You can get really big ones, but I like these little cardboard canvases. It's just on board, a regular piece of canvas, but they're pretty cheap. They come in multi-packs, so they're pretty easy to buy. Now let's look at some of the paints. I've already put some red and some yellow in there, but to start off, I get my brush a little bit wet, and I can take some of the red just by itself and then spread it out over the canvas. You can see a little bit kind of doesn't go very far, so sometimes you have to spread it out a little bit, but you can always put on more. You can make it nice and thick depending on how you want the end result to be. But once you put it on the canvas, it immediately starts drying. And so you need to make sure and kind of work with it a little bit and spread it as much as you want to. And then you can kind of come back and you can layer it on. So once you get one color in, then obviously you want to learn how to mix colors. So I'm going to mix some red and some yellow here and make a nice orange. And you can see it's pretty different from that red. It's, you can blend them together and make a nice transition there because that red is still just a little bit wet and there was enough on the canvas. And then I can come back in and put some yellow for that, nice brightness in the corner and even blend that in so that it is, a nice transition and it has a nice gradient across the canvas. Now, if I'd waited too long, I wouldn't have been able to blend these very easily, but because they're still kind of wet on the canvas, it's easier to blend them and make them, go nice and all the way across. And, and I can come back in and change some of the coloring if I want to. It doesn't have to be a perfect gradient. Obviously this is art, so it's up to you how you create and what you create. Now that we're done with the brush, we want to make sure that the paint is drying how we like. We put it in the water, kind of push against the bottom a little bit with the brush. Make sure it gets good and clean, and then once it does, take it out and put it on the drying or on the cleaning cloth there. Kind of wipe it a little bit, and that should get everything off of it. And you want to make sure and keep your brushes clean because if they get gunked up with paint, it's really hard to get that off without some kind of a paint thinner later on. But that is the basics of using acrylics. They're pretty simple and pretty easy to use and easy to get started with. And just like anything else, they just take a little bit of extra practice. And, nobody's going to create a masterpiece on their first shot. But it's always fun to learn new things like this, and hopefully I have given you a decent introduction and gotten you excited about learning to use acrylic paints and get started on your own paintings.